Last time, patterns began to shift beneath the surface of routine. Dury moved through his days with purpose disguised as ordinary work, observing, learning, accumulating knowledge that looked like nothing from the outside. Lurie sensed something building. Lin remained blind to it, comfortable in his certainty that people like Dury stay exactly where the world puts them. The warehouse was quiet. Too quiet that the only thing that spoke out loud was silence. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, the kind of gray day where the sun never quite breaks through the clouds, where everything exists in a state of perpetual twilight. The usual sounds were there, forklifts beeping as they reversed, conveyor belts humming their mechanical rhythms, the distant clatter of boxes being sorted and stacked. But something was different. The human sounds had changed. The casual conversations that normally filled the spaces between work had diminished. People moved with more focus, more intention. There was an efficiency to the morning that hadn't existed before, a sense of purpose that transformed random activity into coordinated effort. Lin strutted in around mid-morning, loud and confident as always. He'd gotten into the habit of visiting the main warehouse periodically, not because his municipal job required it, but because he enjoyed the performance of authority, the way workers would pause briefly to acknowledge someone who represented government oversight, even meaningless oversight. "Morning, everyone," he announced, his voice carrying that particular quality of false friendliness that people in minor positions of power often develop. "Just checking in, making sure everything's running smoothly. You know how it is, efficiency, accountability, all that good stuff nobody wants to think about but everybody depends on." A few workers nodded politely. Most simply continued working. Lin didn't notice how the dynamics had shifted. Didn't see the way eyes now tracked Dury's movements rather than his own. Didn't recognize that the brief acknowledgments he received were empty gestures, the minimum required by social convention, nothing more. He was too busy performing to notice he'd lost his audience. The shift had happened gradually, too slowly for any single moment to mark as the turning point. It began with small things. A loading supervisor asking Dury's opinion on a scheduling conflict. A warehouse manager requesting his input on a route optimization. Workers checking with him before making decisions that previously they'd made independently or deferred to official authority. When mistakes happened, and they always happened in systems run by humans operating under pressure, Dury corrected them. Calmly. Precisely. Without anger or condescension. He didn't write reports or file complaints. Didn't pull rank that he didn't officially possess. He simply identified problems, suggested solutions, and moved on. His corrections carried no emotional weight, no judgment. They were observations about systems, not accusations about people. And people responded to that. Workers tired of being blamed for systemic failures, tired of supervisors who managed through intimidation rather than insight, tired of the constant low-grade anxiety that comes from working in environments where mistakes mean humiliation. Dury offered something different. Competence without cruelty. Knowledge without performance. Authority that emerged organically rather than being imposed artificially. One morning, a scheduling crisis emerged. A major client needed an emergency delivery that would require reorganizing the entire day's routes. The warehouse manager was ready to call the regional office, to escalate the problem up the chain of command, to follow protocols that would solve the issue eventually while creating chaos in the immediate present. "Wait," Dury said quietly. Not loudly. Not insistently. Just that single word, spoken calmly. Everyone stopped. Turned. Waited. Dury studied the routing board for less than a minute, his eyes tracking patterns, calculating efficiencies that existed but hadn't been noticed. If we move the industrial district deliveries to afternoon, consolidate the residential clusters into 2 routes instead of 3, and delay the warehouse supply run by 2 hours, we can accommodate the emergency delivery without disrupting the priority contracts. Silence as people processed this. The warehouse manager checked the proposal against his own mental calculations. Looked at the routing board. Looked back at Dury. That would actually work. It would, Dury confirmed. And we'd finish earlier than originally scheduled. They implemented his solution. It worked exactly as he'd described. Word spread. Not as formal recognition, no announcements, no title changes, no official acknowledgement, but as quiet understanding, as a shift in the invisible hierarchies that actually govern how work gets done, separate from the official hierarchies shown on organizational charts. Lin walked into this changed environment completely unaware. He was examining a clipboard with official-looking documents, permits or regulations or some other administrative concern that gave him an excuse to be there, to be noticed, to feel important. So, Dury, Lin said with false casualness, loud enough for others to hear. Still hauling boxes? Haven't moved up to anything more substantial yet? The mockery was automatic at this point. Habit more than intention. Dury was checking a delivery manifest, confirming addresses before loading his van. He glanced up briefly, met Lin's eyes for just a moment, then returned to his work without responding. The silence was pointed, deliberate. Lin felt it but misinterpreted it. He assumed the silence was submission, embarrassment, the speechlessness of someone confronted with their own limitations. He smiled, satisfied. That afternoon, another crisis emerged. Smaller this time, but urgent. A critical shipment was missing documentation required for delivery. Without it, the shipment would be rejected, penalties would apply, relationships with a major client would suffer. The supervisor was panicking, making phone calls, trying to locate the paperwork that should have been filed days ago. Who was responsible for this? He demanded, his voice sharp with stress and anger. Who forgot to process the documentation? People looked uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to answer, because answering meant accepting blame for a mistake that had probably been systemic rather than individual, a failure of training or procedures or communication that would nevertheless be treated as personal incompetence. Dury walked over calmly. The documentation wasn't forgotten, he said. It was filed under the wrong client code, an easy mistake given how similar the account numbers are. It's in the system. I can retrieve it. He moved to the computer terminal, navigated through screens with practiced efficiency, located the missing paperwork within minutes. The supervisor exhaled with relief. Thank you. That could have been a disaster. Dury nodded and returned to his work as if solving critical problems was simply part of loading boxes. Nothing special, nothing worth discussing. But everyone had seen it. The competence. The calm. The way crisis became manageable in his presence. Lin, standing nearby observing, felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. Later that week, the warehouse manager was reviewing performance metrics. Delivery times, error rates, customer satisfaction scores. He noticed a pattern he couldn't initially explain. Routes that Dury ran consistently performed better across every metric. Not by huge margins, but consistently, significantly, statistically. How are you doing this? The manager asked, genuine curiosity replacing any hint of accusation. Dury shrugged slightly. I pay attention. Notice patterns. Adjust routes based on traffic, customer preferences, building access issues. Small optimizations that accumulate. We should document this. Create best practices. Train others. If you want, Dury said without enthusiasm or resistance. Simply neutral acknowledgement. The manager studied him for a moment. You know more about how this operation actually works than anyone else here, don't you? I know what I've observed. That's not what I asked. Dury smiled faintly. Then yes. Probably yes. So why are you still just a delivery driver? Who says I'm just a delivery driver? The question hung in the air, carrying implications the manager would only understand later. Lin began appearing at the warehouse more frequently. He claimed it was part of his expanded municipal responsibilities, but everyone recognized it for what it was: insecurity expressed as oversight, the need to reassert authority that felt somehow diminished even though nothing official had changed. One afternoon, he found Dury explaining something to a group of newer workers: how to organize their vans for maximum efficiency, how to read addresses to identify potential access problems, small techniques that separated experienced drivers from struggling ones. Who put you in charge? Lin demanded, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. The question was meant to be rhetorical, dismissive. A reminder that official authority mattered, that informal influence was meaningless without institutional backing. Dury looked at him calmly. Said nothing. The newer workers glanced between Dury and Lin, uncertain. The moment stretched uncomfortably. I asked you a question, Lin pressed. Who gave you authority to train people? To make decisions? To act like you're something more than what you are? Still Dury said nothing. Just held Lin's gaze with that infuriating calm, that unshakable composure that made anger seem childish by contrast. One of the newer workers spoke up, hesitantly. He's just helping us. Showing us stuff that makes the job easier. Nobody put him in charge. We asked. Lin turned his attention to the young worker, ready to redirect his frustration, to remind everyone of hierarchies and proper channels and the importance of following official procedures. But before he could speak, the warehouse manager appeared. Lin, the manager said, his tone professional but firm. If you need something, let me know. Otherwise, please don't interfere with training. We have schedules to maintain. It wasn't a direct confrontation. Wasn't even particularly harsh. But it was a boundary, clear, unmistakable, supported by actual authority rather than performed authority. Lin's face reddened. He opened his mouth to respond, to assert himself, to remind everyone that he represented government oversight and couldn't simply be dismissed. But the manager had already turned away, his attention back on Dury and the trainees, implicitly signaling that the conversation was over, that Lin's presence was tolerated but not required, not valued, not particularly relevant to the actual work being done. Humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the gap between what you expect and what actually happens. In the moment when you reach for authority and find nothing there. When you speak and realize nobody's really listening. When you try to diminish someone and discover they're already beyond your reach. Lin stood there for a long moment, irrelevant and aware of it, before walking away with as much dignity as he could salvage. Which wasn't much. Luri watched these changes from her usual observation point. She saw the way people now gravitated toward Dury. The way conversations paused when he approached, not from fear but from attention. The way problems found their way to him regardless of official channels, because people trusted his solutions more than they trusted procedures. She saw something else too, something that concerned her slightly even as it impressed her. Dury took nothing. Demanded nothing. Asked for no recognition, no promotion, no official acknowledgement of the role he'd come to occupy. And power shifted anyway. Not through ambition or manipulation or political maneuvering, but through competence that couldn't be ignored, through calm that made chaos manageable, through presence that created gravity, pulling things toward it without any apparent effort. This was power of a different kind. More subtle than Lin's performed authority. More dangerous because it was genuine. One evening, as they sat together on their usual steps, Luri asked the question that had been building. What are you doing? Dury understood she wasn't asking about his job. What I've always done. Paying attention. learning systems, being useful. It's more than that now. Is it? You know it is. He was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal, how much to keep private. I learned something while I was away, he finally said. People focus on the wrong kind of power. They think power is loud, official, performed. But real power is different. It's the ability to make things happen, to solve problems nobody else can solve, to be necessary in ways that can't be easily replaced. And you're becoming necessary. I'm becoming useful. There's a difference. Not really, Luri said. Not in practice. She was right and he knew it. But acknowledging it felt dangerous, like naming something might break it, might transform quiet competence into visible ambition that people would feel compelled to resist. Lin felt it too, though he couldn't articulate what exactly was happening. He just knew that something fundamental had shifted, that when he entered spaces where Duri worked, people's attention moved away from him and towards someone who should have been invisible, that his mockery no longer landed the way it used to, bouncing off instead of wounding, making him look petty rather than making Duri look small. And for the first time in his comfortable life, Lin was afraid. Not of anything specific. Not of losing his job or his status or any concrete thing he could identify and defend against. But of becoming irrelevant. Of discovering that all his performed authority was hollow, that the power he'd assumed was his by right was actually just permission that could be quietly withdrawn. That the people he'd dismissed most casually might matter more than he ever had. The warehouse grew quieter still as December approached. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of focused work, of systems functioning smoothly, of people who knew what they were doing and trusted each other to do it well. Duri moved through it all with the same unhurried calm he'd always shown. Loading boxes, making deliveries, solving problems, being necessary without announcing it, building power without performing it, and changing everything while appearing to change nothing at all. The streets still looked the same. The lights still flickered. The cracks still spread. But beneath the unchanged surface, tectonic plates were shifting. Something was ending. Something was beginning. And only some people could feel it coming. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of listener this story was meant for. Someone who understands that the quietest transformations are often the most profound, that power built slowly is power that lasts, that the people dismissed most casually sometimes become the people who matter most. Do well to leave a comment below, like, share and subscribe so you don't miss part 5, where everything Duri has been building will finally reveal its purpose.